Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Eden Prairie Planning Commission meeting. It's Monday, June 27th, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Would everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We are without broadcast audio this evening, and so we'll try and speak loudly. Hope you can hear our voices, and I recommend to the commissioners to speak up, of course. We all will. Anybody can't understand us, maybe back, you feel free to just casually wave your hand and we'll try and speak up, but just to let you know we're without the audio tonight. All right? The first thing on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Have a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, motion by Taylor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Kirk. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last Planning Commission meeting held Monday, June 13th, 2022. Anybody like to have any comments about those minutes that were published out? Or if not, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Gooding. I have a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Appreciate it. Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved from June 13th, 2022. Very good. We have one public hearing on the agenda this evening. It's for the Eden Prairie multifamily. It's a request for guide plan change from office to medium high density residential on 7.01 acres, a PUD concept review on 7.01 acres, a PUD district review with waivers on 7.01 acres, zoning change from rural to RM 2.5 on 7.01 acres, site plan review on 7.01 acres, and a preliminary plat on 7.01 acres. The way our public hearing works in our city here is we're going to ask the developer or applicant if he wants to stand up and give our commission a presentation. We'd appreciate that. Then we're going to have staff give a staff report to the commissioners, and then we'll open it up to those people in the audience who wish to speak about the project to come forward and have any questions answered. All right? So with that, is the applicant available for a short presentation? Please come up and introduce yourself and give us your name and address.
Sheriff R., members of the Planning Commission, my name is Tony Baracco, 4439 Fremont Avenue South of Minneapolis. I am the president of Ryan Company's North Region, which is primarily a Minnesota operation. I'm going to introduce my team real quick, then I'll yield the podium to Josh Ekstrand to do the architectural review, and then I'll come back for a few more comments in a moment. Would like to introduce other members of the team: Josh, Joe, McKenna, Justin, and Chad, representing our architecture, civil, and landscape. And in the spirit of time, we'll bring up Josh.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the time tonight, commissioners. I am Josh Ekstrand, 6106 Arctic Way, Edina. And I want to take a few minutes to walk you through the project that we're proposing in Eden Prairie. So I think everyone's familiar with the site. We are bordered by Valley View Road and Top View Road, just to the east of the Home Depot and to the north of Menards. As has been mentioned, it is a 7-acre site. We've got 211 units, 268 parking stalls, and we're at about 1.3 stalls per unit. And I do want to note that after working with staff, we have recently added about 16 stalls, so this 15 stalls. So this new number is new from what our original submittal was to try to squeeze some more parking out of that. I'll show you where that is when we get into the plans. The site plan, as you can see, is very, the real beauty of this site and the value here that we see is that this is a natural setting with natural opportunities for amenities and walking trails and really embracing living in a very natural setting. So we think that the heavily wooded site with a ton of great existing trees is a phenomenal asset to the site, and we've really tried to nestle the building into the topography and take advantage of maintaining as many trees as possible to really fit the building in, have it feel like it's part of the context that's been around previously, and take advantage of all the natural amenities with walking trails and public spaces for residents scattered around the site. It has one access point from Valley View Road, a little over 600 feet from the intersection of the top view. That is a right in, right out only. And that would have access to a number of surface stalls and then direct access into the below grade parking, which I'll show in a few moments. One thing we did want to just highlight here is the comparison of the trip generation and traffic impacts of this use compared to what the site is guided for in the 2030 plan. And the charts here might be a little bit small to read at a distance, but the red bars are what the daily trips would be for a office use of 35,000 square feet, and the green bars are the typical trips for our use with residential 211 units on the site. So we think that this is a significantly less impactful traffic impact to the Valley View Road than what the project is the site is otherwise guided. We have a few renderings to just walk through the character of the building and the experience of how this will meet the neighborhood. This is the motor court entry, walking into the main lobby. We'll show in the plans that inside the lobby we've got common spaces really clustered around that core where the building comes together. There's a lot of common spaces that pass through the building to get out to the different natural experiences outside the building. We've got a mixture of cement board panel, cement board lap siding, and brick as our primary building materials. And worth noting, the brick extends all the way around the building on the first floor and up to the third floor of the bump outs as we travel around. So you'll see that, as you can see, we've tried to create some variety and massing with the building, bumping out several areas of the facade with those brick elements and pulling down the lighter colored cement board on the fifth and fourth floor to give some variation in height and break down some of the scale. And we've also gone with a pitched roof to really give it a residential feel and align a little bit better with the single family neighborhood. View looking over the pool deck, kind of nestled into the corner there. There's a note here, you may not be able to see, but the rendering is unfortunately mildly incorrect. It's not showing the brick in a couple areas, but we've noted where that should be shown. That would be part of it extending all the way around the building. Here's the pool deck looking across, and again, the number of trees in the natural landscape that are visible really make this feel like you're kind of in a tree house with a wooded lot. Walking trails on the kind of northeast side of the project. We've got a pet exercise area, some other outdoor sporting event areas or games areas to allow residents to get out there and have a number of different experiences in rural areas as well. And there's a view of the project looking along Valley View Road from above to show how it kind of nestles in there. This is a challenging view to accurately convey how the trees would kind of block some of that visibility. But we do have a number of site sections at the end that we can refer to help walk through some of that if necessary. This parking level plan shows where we've added the additional parking stalls in the form of tandem stalls. So if you look kind of in the upper left of the L shape where there's a hatch, we've added a number of tandem stalls in front of the stalls that were previously shown. So we've picked up about 15 stalls to go from 253 to 268 in between below grade and surface parking. Here you can see the kind of center point of the plan where it's not the shades of orange. You can really see where all those common areas connect, and we have the ability for residents to go from the main entry through the pool area and out to the walking trails to the east as well. And then a couple typical floors. I think in terms of, we have some additional information that we're happy to share and help use to answer questions, but I think this really, the perspective views are probably the main way to kind of understand how we've tried to fit into the site. And I think the last comment that I would just make is between the soil conditions, the wetlands, the topography, and the tree density, this is just a very challenging site to make a project work on. And we've worked hard to make this feel as nestled into the neighborhood and as part of the character and context as possible, given a number of complex constraints. I will hand it back to Tony to wrap up with our final comments here before answering questions.
Thank you, Josh, and Commissioners, again, thank you for letting us do a dual presentation here. One point I want to bring up, which is probably the paramount point that we've been working on with staff and Community Development Director Klima throughout, has been parking. The site obviously has some topographical challenges, as Josh mentioned. We've also got a massive soil correction and wetlands that we're working around. And in balance of trying to keep a strong environmental appeal of the site by keeping all the trees, we're trying to reduce the amount of bituminous area on the site. We very much support where we've wound up on most of the items within the staff report. And I just want to make a few comments broadly on parking. First of all, we don't want to build, we have to build enough parking in order to support rentals of units. If we don't have enough parking and can't drive more renters for our projects, we don't think we can be successful. In your packet, you will see some information, including there's a couple of tables. I won't go too deep into these, but basically we have done an analysis of all of the parking comparable properties that are in the area, and they state that the comparable projects that we're looking at have a ratio of 1.3, which is what matches our ratio. We also feel as though, based on usage data from what those projects are actually using, we need 229 stalls for the actual usage of our project. And in proposing 268, we feel as though we will have enough parking there. We support staff's discretion that we require that one stall be allocated per apartment, specifically so that there is availability, including for our income restricted rentals. That is critically important to staff. We share that and we would support that piece. I think the only piece that we are concerned about is a potential mandate to require a capital expenditure at a future date for a structured parking area. We'd be happy to work on restrictions against leasing and that requirement of keeping one parking space affiliated with all the units within the development agreement. But we do have a concern about a mandate of requiring infrastructure built within. Last thing, we've got a number of resources in here, from distance of parking travel to the adjacent spot, and also just a look at some legacy projects in and around the area, and a number of projects in Eden Prairie just down the street, that if you look at the surface parking on these, and I'll welcome the commission to look at the last few slides of this deck, a significant amount of bituminous area in current projects with Eden Prairie is not being used. I went out to 4 properties Saturday morning early, and about half of the outdoor space within those parking projects is being used by renters. So I'd strongly request that the sites be kept in nature, allowing for infiltration and trees and other things. And again, we're happy to work with staff on those other requirements. Here's a few sample images. So if you get to the back of the packet, that's before you'll see what the usage of those surface stalls actually looks like on various projects throughout Eden Prairie. With that, we will pass it to Community Development Director Klima, and we'll be around for questions.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate that. Before we go to the staff report, I'd like to ask the commissioners if they have any questions of the applicant at this point in time. You want to bring up? Commissioner Meddy?
Hi. So obviously parking is the topic and the main concern, and you guys did address some comments and questions. I already had the tandem stalls was one that came to mind. I was thinking to recommend that. So I'm glad to see that. I think there's still, on my part, some concern. This is, the lowest parking count on average of some of the more recent projects that have been approved. I'm curious, I know one of the staff recommendations was to get a perpetual agreement with the neighbor. Are you guys in agreement for doing that, or has those discussions happened?
Sure. Commissioner Matt. We are in discussions with the neighboring office owner, and the neighboring office owner is interested in being able to utilize the trails on the site. We are happy to continue to engage and work on getting a lease arrangement in place. The perpetual nature of that lease is hard to do. So we think we will do our best. It's clearly in the staff report. But the idea of a perpetual lease for a group that owns those improvements is nothing that we can guarantee.
I guess one recommendation I might have is to, within the lease, maybe have an arrangement where it's overnight parking only, so it'd be overflow, overnight parking, not necessary. So that might not impact their use, but I understand that any potential redevelopment of that site, that would be challenging to have something that's actually perpetual. Let's see. Oh, did you have any thought throughout the development of the site plan? So basically, people coming in and out, depending on which direction they're coming from, will have to take a U-turn on Valley View. I think most of us have probably done it before for one reason or another in those areas, but I don't know if that was looked at in the traffic study at all. But did you consider gaining access through to that neighbor, which ultimately connects to Home Depot, and you have a light that you could theoretically get to via that route as a way to alleviate, U-turns?
Sure, Fire Commissioner, I'm gonna turn that over to Chad Lockwood, our civil engineer. Chad?
Good evening, Commissioner Farr, fellow commissioners. My name is Chad Lockwood, Associate Director of Engineering at Ryan Companies, 5117 Beard Avenue South in Minneapolis. And to answer your question, Commissioner Matt, the study did include analysis of U-turns. Found that it was acceptable based on distance. And we do have some constraints on site, as most were previously mentioned, but having a cut through to the neighboring property, I don't think that is a benefit, at least to our site, and to negotiate easements, with additional property owners, I think would be a burden to our project.
Thank you. And then one follow-up question on that, which I could also ask the city, but you might know. If you're traveling eastbound on Valley View towards that Plaza Drive, Top View Road intersection where you might have to take a U-turn, is that left-hand turn light a blinking yellow, or is that green only?
I believe it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Gooding?
I want to do a little bit more follow-up on the U-turn thing too, because I was out looking at it today, right around what I would call rush hour. And if you kind of look at how and where people come from, in a normal traffic pattern, you're going to be making, I would assume, there will be a lot of U-turns from that going east at the traffic light to come back to the development. And I waited for 20, 25 seconds to be able to make a U-turn after the light had been blinking yellow, in a gap in traffic, and there was nobody behind me, so I was the only one waiting. It's concerning, it's, if you get 2 or 3 cars there, or another band of traffic coming, you've got one cycle, you got another cycle, that doesn't look as clean. The other way is not as bad because you don't have to go to the light at the Home Depot, you've got the other cut through across from the pet storage. But that eastbound one is not well suited for that, in my opinion, for a busy traffic time. So it's a concern of mine. Like Commissioner Meddy, the parking has been a big concern, addressing it, and it gets right to the low end of everything we've seen. I know in the data chart you guys provided in your report, you cited other projects in Hopkins and Bloomington, but there's no data as to where they are relative to public transportation. And this one doesn't suit any public transportation. So it's kind of hard to look at those other, building 1, building 2, building 3, building 4, building 5, and not having any idea of where they're at relative to public transportation. Edina's got some pretty good feeder public transportation for buses. That's not a strong point of this area. So can you speak to that?
I personally cannot. Other team members.
Commissioners, my name is Joe Conway, 3719 Washburn Avenue North, Minneapolis. Particularly with respect to your comment about the sample projects, off the top of my head, the only one that has a significant transit investment around it is the Fenley, I believe. The one that's located in Bloomington, near adjacent to Clearville. All the rest just have local buses.
Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Taylor?
So as we was going through the presentation, I noticed that there's only one entrance in and out. In the worst case scenario, is there any plans to build another entrance to the site instead of the one entrance off of Valley View Road?
Commissioner Taylor, that was considered. We went through numerous site plan revisions for the project to try to figure out the various constraints and pieces of the puzzle. We do have some significant restrictions based on topography, which has been mentioned. And access to top view would be great in my mind, but it's a physical constraint. There's about a 20-foot hill that we have to overcome there to connect to our project. And based on county spacing guidelines, where we have the entry on Valley View is the only acceptable location along that frontage. We could have it further west, but we could only have one access to it.
So with that said, has the, and I'm not sure if this is the right or they're the right folks, but has the fire marshal or the department's taken a look at that and said that this is suitable? I mean, if you have an emergency and fire trucks need to get in and ambulance need to get in and people are trying to exit, that can be a major bottleneck.
Yeah, we have had review from emergency services. And they found the one access is acceptable. We do have a fire truck turnaround within the site so that vehicles can get in and get back.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Taylor. Anybody else? So I have a comment. There seem to be some neighbors in the audience, and so Josh, you kind of skipped over the site sections part of your presentation, I think, just to keep the project moving along here. But I think that might be a good idea, is to just talk to us about some of the site sections from the neighborhood to the north.
Absolutely happy to do that.
Thanks.
Get back to them. Okay, we'll go to the beginning and then work back. So we've got a number of views, site sections, and views from the existing site. So this is standing, so there is a property between our north property line and Roberts Drive. So this view that we're seeing here is the before, obviously on the left side, with no building in it. And this is a winter condition taken earlier this spring. And the after, you can see the building through there, but obviously you can see the summer view in the lower inset there, that really the view of the project is I would say minimal to zero once the vegetation is live, and about halfway blocked off from Roberts Drive when it is a winter condition and there's no foliage between you. The next view here is intended to just show kind of how that topography affects us and how we've kind of held the building down so that it stays low and it doesn't encumber that experience off Roberts Drive, or really as you're going up top view, you kind of go up and past it. Again, this is a winter condition, so we're seeing it with no leaves on the trees or foliage on the ground, which would help block it even further. But you can get a sense of kind of how that's held back from the street frontage and stays back quite a bit. This view is looking south on Valley View, sitting at the intersection that we were just referring to, where you would be facing us, waiting to take a U-turn on the light, and just shows, again, the distance that the building is set back from the street with the surface parking in front of it, that it kind of stays back below the existing tree line or about the height of the existing tree line, and does not over-dominate that Valley View frontage like a more urban condition of bringing it up to the property line might do. And then here we have a couple site sections that just show how this fits in a two-dimensional drawing with the hill cutting through in front of us. So it's a little bit small, but in the lower left image here, you can see the vertical yellow line is showing where that cut is happening. So that is basically kind of cut through at that northeast corner of the property. And you can see that the height of Roberts Road going to the north above that, or to the north of the site, is almost at the ceiling height, or at the roof height of the building. This is a view cut through at Roberts Road, looking to the south, and just showing the visibility of the roof line there is very good. So the perspective we saw early on was because you're seeing down from where your eye can see up, and this one is just showing that if you cut through at the road, you are cutting through at effectively the roof height of the building. This one is further back, so now we're on the far side of the office building to our west, looking to the east, and you can see the church and some of the single-family homes there on the left side of the image, and just their relative height compared to the roof line of the building in the distance. And then also you can see the office building to the west, kind of partially below the grade cut line and partially sticking up on the right side of the image, just for kind of the comparative scale of how those two work together. And then I think this is lastly, basically cut through at approximately Valley View, looking north, and showing just the edge of where that office building is on the left side and kind of the height of that relative to the building. And you can see how much that grade, as Chad mentioned, how low our parking is compared to Valley View on the right side. So there's a significant drop down the bank from the road down to the surface parking lot. And we're really putting our parking entry in at level grade, or approximately level with the surface parking lot itself. So trees and the height of the existing site around it certainly are intended here to demonstrate that we're well below the tree line of what you perceive at the top of the hill beyond our site.
Thank you, Josh. That was very helpful. Appreciate that. The last question I have is, I understand there was a traffic report commissioned on this project by SRF, and just in follow-up to fellow commissioners' comments there about the road system, could someone tell me if the report identified the issue of the U-turn on eastbound Valley View Road at Topview, and if the traffic report offered a suggestion for a future widening of Valley View to offer you a left-hand turn lane into your property?
Okay, I want to make sure I got the context.
Two questions, I'm sorry. The first question is, if you're familiar with the SRF report, was it charged to look at the U-turn issue, I don't want to call it a problem yet, the issue at eastbound Valley View Road at Topview?
Correct. It looked at the U-turns at Topview as well as Prairie Center Drive.
Yep.
And found the movements to be acceptable. This is during peak AM and PM hours.
Okay.
And the second one of your question.
Was the topic considered about, besides just the emergency fire truck cut through that median, was there discussion, evaluation, or recommendations to eventually widen Valley View Road with the extra right-of-way? I don't put words in their mouth, but something in order to get you a left-hand turn lane into your property going eastbound on Valley View Road?
That was, I believe that was investigated, and the county did not want a left turn lane into our site, hence the emergency access that's provided.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
That was the result of this.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Commissioners, any last few questions of the applicant? Commissioner Meddy?
I have a couple follow-up ones that now come to mind. One's really just a comment architecturally. Well, it's sort of a question architecturally. I noticed in the renderings the window trim is white. The rest of the building appears to have a dark roof, dark balconies, and other colors that lend itself well, I think, to that dark trim. And I wondered if there was a reason why white was chosen. I feel like sometimes that comes off as a bit stark. doesn't quite look as nice as the black trim, especially I think, again, this is a bit of an opinion, I'm not the architect here, but with the design you have going, I was kind of curious what that choice was as opposed to black.
Yeah, the thought was that having more contrast between the railings and the windows just help break up the facade a little bit more and helps avoid some of the concerns of a five-story building feeling quite tall in this context. So try to help mitigate that by having some different scale elements. And I would say the other piece was kind of the, the challenge of minimizing the number of different window colors, which can tend to look very kind of frantic across the facade. And when we studied it with dark frames, it subjectively looked a bit weird in the lighter colored background areas. And so it kind of created a more jarring amount of contrast on other areas of the building. And so from keeping it, similar to the single family residential scale moves of some of the things that we've done, we felt that the white trimmed windows spoke to that better. And felt more
Thanks for explaining that process. And I'm not sure here on this rendering that we're looking at, over to the left face, you have a patio, a window, and then what appears to be a vent for the HVAC. That appears in this rendering to be white. I mean, typically I think we prefer that to just blend in with whatever siding color that is. I can't tell if that's just some small window or if that's the vent, and I'm over on the left side.
That is the through wall HVAC unit. That's correct, and it's actually more of a tan color, so it kind of is. It's actually fairly close to the color of the cement board siding that's within. It reads a little bit off of that model with the openings in it, and so you end up seeing it's a bit of a trick.
Okay. My second question, this might be more of a civil question, whoever can answer it. I'm wondering if someone can just explain now this fire truck left turn. Right now it's a grass median. I'm concerned that people are gonna go ahead and, depending, I don't know if it's got a bump or something that helps deter your average person from just going ahead and using that left-hand turn lane. Can you explain how that's designed?
Yeah, so that was a concern, and it's being addressed by signage, and there is a surmountable curb, but it's designed such that people, everyday drivers will not get access.
Thanks.
All right, last request before we let you guys off the hook. Would someone be able to come up and summarize the neighborhood meeting, attendance, and general discussion that happened during the neighborhood meeting?
Sure, Commissioner Farr, County Commissioners, we had a neighborhood meeting. I'm not sure of the exact date, but there was one person in attendance that spoke on behalf of the project, and that was the extent of our neighborhood outreach. We only have one person.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Julie, could you run us through the staff report, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the applicant is requesting a guide plan change from an office guiding to medium high density residential. They're also requesting PUD approval with waivers, a zoning change from rural to RM25, a site plan review, and a merit plat. The applicant has provided a good summary overview of the project as a whole, so I'll try and touch on those things that are more relevant from a staff perspective that didn't get quite as much attention. So the site plan does comply with several of the performance standards and exceed those performance standards. For instance, the landscaping and tree replacement requirements are being met through a combination of both landscaping on site as well as some payment into the tree replacement fund in order to meet those requirements. The project also meets and exceeds the usable open space requirement of the multifamily zoning districts by providing those amenities both internal to the building as well as exterior to the site. The Parking, we'll leave that for a little bit later because we're going to talk about there. From a building material standpoint, the building does comply with the building material and architectural requirements. The staff report does mention that the original submittal did not include as much brick. The applicant has continued to work with staff and has added additional brick along the base of the building as they talked about in their presentation. So we'll see that change from the initial submittal that was provided. There are several PUD waivers that are being requested. Some of those include building height and density for the site, which is consistent with the requested comp plan guiding for the site. They are also requesting a waiver with regard to parking, and the applicant has talked about that as well as some of the staff recommendations. So kind of getting into a little more detail on that. Staff is recommending that any visitor parking be provided off-site on the office property to the west is who the applicant has intends to reach out to provide that. That would allow for all parking on site to be provided for residents of the property. In addition, staff is recommending that an allocation of at least one stall per unit be provided to ensure that all of those units are available for rent at any given time that they become available. As the staff report mentions, this application is also requesting tax increment financing. As a part of that tax increment financing, 20% of the units would be kept affordable at 50% of the average median income. In addition, the applicant is proposing to comply with the inclusionary housing requirement, which would add another 5% of the units at an affordable rate of 80% AMI. So overall, 25% of the units in this project would meet affordability standards. So staff is recommending that allocation of one stall per unit to ensure that those affordable units are available for rent to future or current Eden Prairie residents. In addition, staff is also recommending that prior to the city council review, additional review of the site be done in order to identify any areas where structured parking, whether that's additional parking in the underground facility or additional structured parking above ground, could be provided in the event that the site proves to not have enough parking as being proposed. As, of course, the staff report was written before the additional, I think it was 16 units were added, so that parking ratio now increases to 1.3 versus the 1.2 that is outlined in your staff report. In addition, they are also requesting a waiver for wall signage. The residential district allows a maximum wall signage of 6 square feet. They're proposing one wall sign of 12 square feet. Staff has looked at that waiver, similar to how the city has looked at other waivers where we've identified what's the total amount of signage allowed on the site and allowed that to be redistributed between the wall signage and the monument sign in order so that the total maximum is not exceeded. So staff is recommending approval of that waiver as outlined in the staff report. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, questions for staff? Who'd like to start out? Commissioner Reddick, go ahead. Absolutely.
I have some questions.
That's fine.
Just so I understand the wetland setback, encroachment waiver, the only thing on the whole site encroaching the setback is these trails, or is part of that encroachment include either the building and or like the pool area?
Mr. Chairman, of the commission, it's my understanding that it is just the trail area, not the building.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I might have more later. We'll see.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll jump in if nobody else has any. Commissioner Brody?
Yeah, I got a question. I'm fussing about this parking thing. Clearly, in the Twin Cities, we have a number of facilities like this that were built adjacent to the light rail and other things that allowed them to significantly reduce the parking. Some of these younger people just don't have cars anymore. They use Uber and Lyft and all sorts of things. And looking at the examples we have in here, are any of these elderly facilities where there might be a different set of demographics in terms of how many automobiles people would have? I'm just confused. My gut feeling is we're trying to put too big a building into this site. And it bothers me. I know we've got a workaround that's kind of jimmy together. I just don't know what to say. I'm sorry, go ahead. I don't have no specific question, I'm just.
Okay, no question for staff this time, but thank you for your comment, okay? Did you want to say something in response to that, Julie? I saw your hand up.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I was just going to clarify that the project as proposed does not have an income restriction in that some of the units are proposed only for seniors. It is a market, general occupancy type of proposal at this point.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Reddy?
I have a follow-up just on the parking question. From the city's perspective, okay, you know, we see their ratio. In the staff report, we have some of these other projects, you know, as I'm now seeing, you know, this is setting a precedent, other projects are going forward. Is there a line we're drawing? Is there a number we're aiming for? Every project is a little bit different. You could also argue target market, closer to bus lines, etc. You know, so I guess my question for the city, and this, I'm sure we'll discuss this more, is, you know, what's the minimum that the city, you know, number-wise, it thinks is sufficient for this development to proceed with this recommendation?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the conversations that staff has had with the developer have been similar to the information that's provided in your staff report. We've provided them with details about other projects, what those parking waivers were at. Some of those, as you see from your staff report, are in that 1.6, 1.7 ratio. Of course, to Mr. Grody's comments, we do have senior projects that were parked at a lower rate, but this is not a senior project. So we did have those conversations with them, encourage them to provide parking, to get as close to that number as possible, because that is what the city has been comfortable with in the past. And if they were going to propose parking that was of a different metric, then we would need additional information about how that works in some of their other projects. So that's why you'll see that information included in the staff report, where they're talking about a roughly 1.2 to 1.4 being demonstrated as workable in some of their other projects, speaking to some of those issues that Commissioner Grody identified in just a shift in demographics. We did ask those questions that you asked earlier about how do those projects measure up to this site? Did they have proof of parking in their approval? Did they have joint parking agreements? Were they close to transit? And by and large, the answer to all of those questions was no. Those sites were similarly constrained, maybe not by the same constraints, but did not provide any option to add additional parking in the future if the parking proved insufficient.
Okay, just one follow. I don't want to, on the parking thing. City code requirement for parking, I recall some past conversations about potentially changing it. I don't know if, and I recall, you know, it being 2 stalls per unit. Is the current requirement that we're talking about here in the waiver an updated parking requirement where that it was reduced for the studios, and that's the latest greatest? It's not, is there any discussion for further amendment, or is that sort of where the city, you know, is sitting right now on parking requirement?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so the standards that are being applied to this do reflect the recent, within the last year, code amendment that reduced parking to 1 per studio, 1 stall per studio. There is not, at this point, further conversation about reducing that. That's not to say that conversation couldn't happen in the future as transit options change, demographics change, but at this point, that's not something that's on our radar.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for you.
Commissioner Gooding?
So my understanding, and let's see if I got this right, is one of the staff positions is that the city is requiring one stall per unit. It would be attached to a lease type of situation. In other words, if they've got over 211 units, they're gonna have 211 of those stalls, at least one for each one of those units, period.
Right.
And that's an impact that would be a part. So really then it becomes their financial risk versus any risk to the city. You know, I mean, this talk of overflow parking, they don't have it. People just won't rent their apartments, which doesn't make, the builder doesn't think they can do it. Why would they invest those millions of dollars to build it? So I'm wrestling with that, because the parking has been a concern of mine. But if there's a parking, and I'm just trying to get this in my own head, if there's a parking spot for each unit with some extras, right? And there's no deal made with anybody else, I don't even know why we would even push that, because then all the risk is on them. They can't rent them, they sit in. Does that bother us as the city? Probably not. Would sure bother them as an owner, I think. So they'd have to internally resolve that if that lower number is acceptable and the project is approved. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I understand where you're going with that. I'm hoping there's a lot of rhetorical questions in that commentary. But to your point, staff's recommendation of allocating one stall per unit, the intention behind that is to ensure that all of those affordable units are always available to be rented to the current or future Eden Prairie resident. And as we said, the remaining, those delta of units would have to be the responsibility of the property manager in order to manage those through their parking leases.
Commissioner Kirk, did you have a comment?
I do. I think the city does have some skin in the game on this because people may very well rent units and have multiple vehicles and just figure they're going to find someplace else to park them. And I worry that will impact the city streets. I mean, we've got all the streets surrounding the area there are no parking streets. If somebody chooses now, well, I don't have any place to put my second car, I'm just gonna put it on Topview or on Roberts or heaven forbid on Valley View. I mean, that's right. But I think we can't assume that people will, well, I can't get 2 lots, so I won't rent this unit. They may well rent it and say, we'll figure it out. So I think we got to take this issue seriously, because in my history on the Planning Commission, we've made that mistake once before, and we're still paying for it. So.
Can I ask this again? Julie?
Yeah, it's just clarification here. We're not deliberating yet. We're just asking staff questions.
Yes.
We'll come back after the public hearing and deliberate, but this is a good conversation, so I don't want to stop the flow. Commissioner Marcos?
Yeah, just there was a comment or there in the staff report or staff recommendation about the height waiver and the idea of if they were to build another story and how that plays in. What is the allowed, if there is, height per city code without having to?
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, the height allowed by city code is 45 feet, so they are currently requesting a waiver to go to roughly 64 feet in height. So if, for instance, they were to add a story to the building in order to do the underground parking that's proposed, the first level of parking, and then the residential units above it, of course, that would increase the height of the building, which would change the waiver. Now, that's not been explored, so I don't even know, I don't know if the applicant can speak to it, if the site conditions would even permit that, what the economics would be of that, what the impact from a design standpoint would be, would there need to be pilings, I know there's soil conditions out there, so there would be a lot more analysis that would have to be undertaken.
So where is the height measured, at the east end or the west end? Seems to me they're quite different.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the height is measured from the grade of the building to the midpoint of the roof, and it's taken on average over the whole plane of the building.
Okay. Somebody have their hand up over there, Commissioner Meddy?
Thought I was done with questions, one more. That's now just coming to mind looking at the site plan. Okay, so we recently, I don't know how long ago it was, but United Properties came through with the LE development, and they had parking, I recall, surrounding the entire perimeter of the site with no parking islands in one giant row, and I had made a comment or question about that. And now, as I'm just trying to come up with ideas of how, to help alleviate concern, I'm thinking, how else can we fit parking stalls in here? And I'm looking at the southern extent as one long row of parking, and not quite recalling what the rules were, but theoretically, could they eliminate those 3 islands shown in that one row of long parking?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, not without a waiver. The reason that the LE was able to not install the parking islands is because it was a single row through the whole parking lot. This is a multiple row parking lot, so that triggers the need for installing the parking islands per city code requirements.
Thank you.
All right, I have a few questions of staff. Does staff agree with the traffic report from SRF, specifically that the intersection of Top View and Valley View Road regarding the U-turn potential is satisfactory?
Mr. Chairman, member of the commission, yes. Looking at the staff report, they did, as was mentioned, they did look at U-turns. There's existing U-turns out at both intersections on both sides of this development currently, and they obviously go up with this development. There's also been discussions with the county that's the flashing yellow arrow that's on eastbound left turn lane can be programmed to be protected. It's protected during some parts of the day and allow for the flashing yellow other parts. So the county has indicated that if there becomes a problem, they would increase the protected left turns phasing as needed, as well as if there becomes some sightline issues. That intersection has a little bit of sightline issues with the curve of the road.
Yep.
There's some elevation that helps that, but if you've got a lot of left turners westbound waiting to turn on the plaza, that could restrict that. And so they would be open and willing to take those, change that signal time.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The applicant had made some suggestion that the impact of going from the guided office to multifamily had low impact, specifically as it related to traffic trips. Are there negative impacts to city infrastructure and utilities?
No, sir, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
The utilities will support either use.
Okay, all right, thank you. I too, like Commissioner Meddy, like the idea of the tandem parking that they added in the basement. Does the city have any concerns about tandem parking in multifamily projects like this?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, no, we've actually seen this in a couple of other projects that are being constructed or being proposed.
Okay, all right, thank you. In order to gain additional parking, has there been discussion about allowing a higher percentage of compact car parking?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, staff, or excuse me, not staff, city code does not distinguish and provide different standards for compact stalls. The minimum stall size is 9 by 18, and there's not any distinct preference given to compact stalls.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. Has the applicant suggested or asked for the possibility of providing stalls narrower than city standards on this project?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, no.
Thank you. Is the opportunity for a stormwater pond consolidation between the neighbor to the west and the new pond in this southwest corner feasible, such that that would offer additional land area for additional parking?
Mr. Chairman, member of the commission, it hasn't been looked at in detail, but discussions with our water resource engineer this afternoon indicated that it would be a challenge. One pond, they function differently. One's an open water pond, one's an infiltration basin. I don't know about the levels. There's some soil issues. They have to, on this project, they have to dig out a lot of material to provide the infiltration. We've actually got an underground system in there in case that fails. So it's not impossible, but it would be a challenge.
They don't function the same right now, so, yeah, okay. Technically a challenge, okay. There's been talk about the neighboring property to the west offering or being asked to provide this perpetual easement for parking. And I believe in the staff report it was written that that site parks per ordinance right now. So could you describe, if we know it, what the process would be, how the city would react to their agreement with that neighbor? Would that property owner have to then come back and petition the planning commission and city council for a waiver of parking, of which they don't have now? Or what kind of burden would be on them to now have non-conformance?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, should the applicant be able to reach an agreement with the neighboring property owner, the intention based on staff's recommendation is that is for visitor parking only. So because they have off-peak times, office is being largely utilized during business hours, and the need for visitor parking would tend to be, overnight or weekends when that parking lot is largely vacant.
Sure.
It is my expectation that that agreement would be written in order to allow for that use of it during the off-peak time. So therefore, the 315 stalls that are required at the office building would be available during office business hours. So there would not be a non-conforming issue. It would be a private agreement in order to allow off-site parking to support the visitors in evenings and weekends.
Thank you. Very good. Very good. Commissioner
I
Gooding?
have one other follow-up question for the city. Julie, how does our standard of two, for parking per unit for certain things compare to other jurisdictions? Do you know that offhand?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So when we looked at the code amendment a couple of months ago where we were looking at parking, the 2 per unit for the 2 bedrooms certainly is in line with other jurisdictions. There are other communities that do allow a reduced number for the 1 bedrooms because sometimes those are occupied by a household that has a single vehicle. Sometimes they're occupied by households that have more than 1 vehicle. So there was a little more fluidity to those units, but based on Eden Prairie's past practice, at this point we remain at that 2 for the 1 bedroom in order to allow the opportunity for situations like this to be reviewed through a PUD waiver rather than make the change across the board for all 1 bedroom units.
Okay, thanks. Last question, and it just seems to be everything we're kind of dancing around here is, what happens if? So it doesn't sound like a parking ramp is feasible, practical, or economical. And people will more than likely start parking in the parking aisles on site first before trying to attempt to park on Valley View or walk a half a mile up on Top View for that long walk with no sidewalk. I don't think they're going to really leave their site, but it's probably going to be some private property parking where they ought not park first. So the question is, just want to confirm, the city does not police private property. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the city does not actively monitor parking lots for parking compliance.
Okay, so if the city received a complaint that there was a parking problem on private property, what's the city's posture at that
Mr. Chair,
time?
members of the commission, I would anticipate that if we received a complaint about that, there would be outreach to the property owner and or property manager. There would be inspection of the site and in discussions with them about how to remedy that and in what time frame.
Okay, all right, thanks. And the city attorney isn't listening in tonight, but I'm just going to ask the question. What's the process of eviction if that is the ultimate solution of having too many residents on the property that the property cannot support the residents with parking? Is that a last call effort that the city can initiate, or not?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's a question that I would not be able to answer unless there was some further research.
Okay, all right, thank you. I don't have any other questions of staff. Anybody else? Nope, we're all good. All right, this is a public hearing. Thank you for your patience as we've asked a lot of questions back and forth to the applicant and staff. If anybody wants to speak to the commission, ask any questions about this particular project, you may raise your hand and I'll have you come on up to the podium, give your name and address, and we'd be more than happy to listen to you. So, gentlemen, you come on up.
My name is Eric Benson, and I live at 12771 in a Lane. The property is directly to the north side of Roberts, basically backs right up to this project. Obviously not go through about 220 new neighbors, but
I'm sorry, just to be clear, you're the parcel that is
we're right behind it.
sharing the north property line, their north property line, your
Yeah,
south property
our
line?
backyard backs right up to Roberts.
So they're across the street.
Oh, you're across the street?
Yep.
Okay, you don't abut this property?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Right up to Roberts there. Previously, we had a discussion of a real similar project, about 190 units before. Now we're up to about 220. There's a lot of the same issues brought up then. I'd probably encourage you to pull the minutes on those meetings because a lot of this was already addressed. We talked about the traffic patterns, the dangers involved with uncontrolled intersections right there. Another concern is the lack of neighborhood input. The neighborhood meeting notice went out on a Friday or Saturday, and it's held on Wednesday. This notice included people within 500 feet of the project. That's my knowledge, that's the neighborhood investment. Previously on this Numberline project and the previous apartment project, the entire neighborhood was notified. There's a lot of full house here for this. Kind of feel like this one's slipping through the cracks and not necessarily, I don't understand why Ryan doesn't want to put on this.
If you could speak up a little bit, that would help us.
Yeah, we've all got kids going through
The
that.
microphone
The
doesn't work.
mics don't work,
not
so you have to speak up, please.
That's all right.
You know, this isn't going to affect just the properties within 500 feet. This is the entire neighborhood. The traffic patterns affect the neighborhood. We've got kids going through that intersection. It's already a dangerous intersection. People are constantly trying to beat the red lights. Those people trying to beat the red lights are going to be coming upon an uncontrolled intersection, probably 75 yards down the road. That's going to be a problem. It's already a problem. That was discussed back on the previous meeting, and that was one of the big concerns. They talked about trying to put traffic count up onto Top View. It was decided that that was possible because without a red light, you're going to essentially gridlock the intersection of Top View and Roberts switch back to traffic. There's a discussion in regards to whether or not the office building behind it would allow people to go through that way and get an easement for traffic to go through there. He said absolutely not. We actually put this up and said he will not be granted. So that's
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that last sentence of yours?
as far as that being on the table for
What you suggested that,
you discussed the easement, or someone was discussing whether or not the traffic could be routed through the current office building.
Routed through.
To the west of there, and
Thank
he
you.
said the owner of the building said he absolutely will not allow that. Part of my concern on it is obviously the height. I'm gonna be looking straight at this building, I've got, you're going 5 stories. It wasn't that long. I've been in Prairie for 43 years. 3-story building was a big building back then. 5-story in a city center became a big building. Now we're going 5 stories next to residential properties. I mean, that's a big deal. I've been in this house 20 years, and we were under the assumption that there was going to be an office that was going to come in. The office to the west of there is very quiet. You don't even know it's there. there's absolutely no impact on the neighborhood from that office. 220 people with a swimming pool outdoors. I mean, I could hear a flock of turkeys behind me. And you put 220 people back there in another pool. It's gonna have a big impact on our house. It's a big impact on the neighborhood. I know this is probably a profitable project, but it's gonna mess things up for the neighborhood. Just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Anybody else in the audience wish to speak about this project? Ma'am? You state your name and address.
Karen Keeling, I live at 11447 Anderson Lakes Parkway here in Prairie.
Okay, hi Karen.
Hi, yeah, I wasn't prepared, so I just have my questions. So, first question, will they recommend any environmental assessment worksheet for this project? Because it is natural undisturbed area. And also, what are if the zoning change will be consistent with the city's development plan? And also just recently, I don't know if you're aware, but the Minneapolis judge ruled again to stop the 2040 plan. And how does this project, how can this come about after that has been halted? Because I know that Eden Prairie is 22,464 acres big, and there's only 6% left of undisturbed natural area left of it. That means 94% of Eden Prairie has already been developed. And if they put this here, that's going to destroy more natural habitats. And on an environmental basis, I think it'll cause more carbon dioxide in the air. And that's, I mean, they say open spaces, but that's like parks, manicured trails, and parking lots. That's open space, but it's not undisturbed natural habitats for the animals, for the wildlife. And then they're taking down more trees. Trees are air filters, and so the more trees they take down, there won't be more filters for the air. Sure, they're putting out little bitty trees, but they don't provide that filtration like the older trees. So it's like kind of hypocritical with your at a conservation standpoint, because it's like, oh, we're a conservation basis and all that. But here they're developing more and more and more throughout Eden Prairie. I mean, sure, there's one space there. Oh, we're going to fix up all this prairie land off a flying cloud, and they're going to fix it all up again, but it's 2 acres. How pathetic is that? They're building this, they say, oh, look over here, we're fixing up the 2 acres of prairie. And behind everybody's back, they're building this and that and that, and they're destroying more and more prairie land and more forests. And I mean, it's ridiculous how the development is going out of control. And I'm so glad the judge put a halt to that 2040 plan, because this is obviously probably going against it. And how does Eden Prairie want to be? Do they want to be like a natural habitat place, or just like everywhere else where it's like a concrete jungle? I mean, it does not make sense, seriously. And if people brag about Eden Prairie being, oh, we're all about conservation, no, they're not. Oh, we got a conservation award, yay. No, they put up 100 houses recently somewhere near Frederick Miller Spring, while they were like distracting the residents with something else that they were doing so lovely. And so it's like so hypocritical. Can that be put to an end and stop all this development? They come from out of town. They don't care. They have nowhere else to develop probably because the dinosaur developed fully, like concrete jungle, all these little bitty trees. And they don't have anywhere else to develop, so they come to Eden Prairie. Oh, look, there's some land we can destroy and make some more apartment buildings. As if we need more. I mean, look at Purgatory Creek Park, you say. Monstrosity buildings, just like, ooh, right? I mean, you come in there and it used to be all pretty.
Ma'am, I think we're getting your gist of what you're trying to say. If you could speak specifically to this project,
Okay,
we'd
this
appreciate
project should
that.
not
One more minute.
happen.
Thank you.
I think it should not be rezoned to residential because there's enough development going on in Eden Prairie.
Mhm.
And they're taking down too many trees. They say, oh yes, we're putting up trees in the middle of the roads and the parks where they don't have any significance. They're taking down heritage trees. They are the filtration of the air. And then, of course, with more development comes more cars, traffic, of course, more carbon dioxide in the air. It doesn't make sense. All this development does not make sense.
Thank you.
And they should not rezone it, seriously.
Appreciate your comments.
You're welcome, and thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak about the project? Please come forward. Ma'am?
Hi,
Hi.
my name's Megan Del Osborne. I live on 12781 Vina Lane. Eric and I are neighbors in the same cul-de-sac. So our properties are fairly elevated and look over Roberts down at this property.
Okay.
So I have just a lot of questions, and I don't know if it's for them. It's more about the development, but
Sure.
concerns.
We'll try and take your questions. We're not going to answer them while you're standing here, but we'll try and take pretty good notes.
Okay. So the environmental impact, just to kind of mirror that, I agree. If any given time you walk by that area, there's 8 to 10 deer hanging out around there. There's lots of wildlife that hang out in that area. So I am interested in knowing more about the impact of that. I see some of the water stuff addressed. I'm just wondering about the animal environment, if that's been addressed, and sort of where all that plays out with this development. The pool, that concerns me, the sound of a pool. Like Eric mentioned, we hear activities at that church that is right across on Roberts. We hear outdoor activities when they're just having things, not music, I mean just like church gatherings. We hear everything. So I am worried about a pool being right there. I'm wondering if there's hours of operation that will not be available to residents. Can that be restricted? Are there numbers of people that are going to be restricted in the pool area at a given time? Is there a noise sort of thing going to happen there? The view from Roberts, so that was a nice picture of showing standing on Roberts and looking, and it looked very impressive. When it's summer, you don't really see the roof, but our properties are all pretty elevated. So we actually are going to look down. I'm curious if there's any way to understand what our view will look like. Will we see the structure? I have a feeling it will become part of our horizon, given where we are. So we have our decks and our porches and whatnot that are on our homes looking much farther up than if you're standing on Roberts. It's a very different view and perspective that we'll have, which quite frankly is one of the big draws to our neighborhood, are these larger lots and this sort of privacy of view, or sort of what your view looks like. So I am concerned about what our view will look like, not standing on Roberts, but actually in our homes. The lighting, I'm wondering about the lighting, and again, kind of from an atmosphere standpoint, is there going to be a big glow now, kind of in the bottom of, or in that area, that's what we will see now at night, is a glow of lights. So I'm curious if there's any kind of rendering or any kind of estimate of what that's going to be like or look like in terms of our experience of being in our yard. I am wondering where you think the extra cars will park, because we moved from Minneapolis just a few years ago, and we had a place right by a light rail station that was built, and we were just on the other side of where the cars ended up parking. But oh my gosh, those first couple of blocks were inundated with parked cars then, and there's really nothing the city could do. It's parking is available on a city street, and so can people come up to Top View and start parking up there? It's just a short walk down. So I do think people could be interested in going up Top View, parking where the no parking stops, and taking the sidewalk back down to their place. So I'd like to hear where they think parking is going to happen if the whole situation doesn't pan out exactly with the numbers that they're hoping to work out. The U-turn is really concerning. I'd like to understand what quote unquote acceptable means in these reports. What is acceptable? Is it a number? How is it calculated? That's such a vague term and a way to get out of, I feel like, answering a very serious question. It's deemed to be acceptable. And I don't know whose standards those are, where the bar is, but that to me is easy way to get out of really explaining what I think is going to be a big problem. As Eric mentioned, that entrance is one of really two to get into that neighborhood up there. So it's a highly used entrance. And if you appreciate people coming off of 494, they are coming off a 60-mile-an-hour freeway, 60 plus, to a yield they almost never yield to, onto Valley View, and are steaming down that road, which is where these U-turns are going to be trying to be taking place for these people coming down. It is a terrible place to have lots of people trying to do a U-turn. I just can't believe that it's considered acceptable. That's hard for me to understand. So that's part of why I'd like to understand what acceptable means and us to, get a little more detail on what that means. Who is it acceptable to? I'm interested in the construction timeline. If this does go forward, I don't know when that comes out, but I'm wondering about, sounds like there's gonna be a lot of construction because of this soil type, and are we talking about lots of sound pollution for a long time? Because I imagine there's going to have to be some very deep things put down to make this stable, which usually means pounding forever. So I'm just kind of curious what that is going to be like. And that's it. I guess those are all my questions.
Thanks, Megan. Appreciate that. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak about the project?
One more question.
You have one more question?
Yeah, I forgot to get the answer about the environmental assessment worksheet. Is there gonna be one?
You asked that question. It's on our list. Thank you.
Oh, it is on your list?
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
Yep, appreciate that. All right, thank you. Maybe we could work through some of these Q&As with staff quickly.
Do we close the public hearing first?
I would be happy to entertain a motion for that.
I move to close the public hearing.
Thank you, Commissioner
I'll
May.
second.
Second that. Second from Commissioner Grody. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Public hearing is now closed. Okay. Staff, Eric had some adjectives for that intersection, specifically it being uncontrolled. And while I believe that it is, in fact, a controlled intersection, brought up the safety, and I think that bled through a couple other neighbor comments about that being unsafe and whether or not it was acceptable. And so I think that just kind of points to the SRF traffic reports, authenticity and professionalism and guidance that we're getting from those professionals. So maybe just a quick comment on the satisfaction that staff has with the professionalism of the traffic consultant on this project and that intersection's safety.
All right, I will confirm that. I have the traffic study in front of me, so the existing, I'll give you some of the details of this. The intersection to the west, that's uncontrolled, doesn't have a signal, just a stop control on the side. Existing traffic volumes, there were 9 U-turns in peak hour. We're going west back to east. At the signalized intersection of Plaza, the existing U-turns were 2 in the peak hour. No, just wait a second. I'll do the AM and PM, I guess. So going back to the one to the west, AM peak hour was 9, PM peak hour was 10. For the Plaza Drive intersection with the signal, the existing AM is 2, and the PM is 8. SRF in their traffic study, now in the future conditions, this will be 2024, if they have to assume that this is open and operating. The westerly intersection, U-turns go from 30 in the AM peak, 25 in the PM peak. That's at the west intersection. At the Plaza Drive intersection, they go from 10 in the AM peak to 30 in the PM peak. And as I mentioned, I think it was a question about what what is considered acceptable. So U-turns are really based on sight lines, sight distance. If you have a poor sight distance, they don't work very well. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the protected versus permissive left turns, but in their report, they talk about, they reference the AASHTO policy of geometric design for highways and streets, subdivision. It talks about the minimum required sight distance for vehicles to safely make a U-turn from a left turn lane. So based on Valley View Road being 45 miles an hour, the minimum required sight distance to make that movement would be 460 feet. And let's see, I think they, somewhere in here, I think they indicate what that set lines were. They say it's and they don't have the number, they just indicate that it's the distance that observed in the field is acceptable, so it'll be over that 460. They don't give a number exactly.
All right. Can I summarize and maybe have you agree with me? Would their summary be that the impact to the neighborhood may be felt at the intersection of Top View and Valley View in terms of maybe more traffic, but it is still safe and there's no impact in their neighborhood north of that intersection? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, the impacts are going to be on Valley View, not on the intersections, or not on the localized neighborhood.
All right. And getting out of our car, there was a comment about people on the pedestrian sidewalk, specifically children, potentially being at risk. On the east side of Top View, as that sidewalk comes down from the neighborhood to the north and they cross over to the retail establishments, I see that sidewalk is already on the east side again of Top View. It's not on the west side where this development is going on, and there's crosswalks, as I understand. Could you just summarize what that intersection provides in terms of resident safety?
I don't recall just crossing on the east side. So there's a signal or there's a marked crosswalk and signal pedestrian crossing indicators on the east leg of Valley View, not on the west leg.
Okay, great.
According to the aerial that matches showed. And we'll share, there's another diagram here that I can kind of summarize. It shows the amount of U-turn vehicles caused by this development. So obviously the difference in some of these, but it also gives the daily number. So for the west intersection, again, the uncontrolled intersection, based on this development, there are 21 left or U-turners in the AM, 11 U-turners in the PM, and 165 per day. On the east leg at Plaza and Top View, AM, there are 7 U-turns, PM, 18 U-turns, and the daily is 175.
Those are current volumes?
Those are numbers that are just contributed to this development.
Okay, assumed, okay. Yeah.
Assumed, yeah. Based on, the trip generation numbers and the site conditions and site lines. And all that stuff.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. There were questions about the triggers for environmental assessment worksheets or environmental impact statements. I'm assuming that those triggers have not been met. Could I get a summary of those triggers for the general public's awareness?
Sure, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Minnesota state statute sets thresholds for the level of development that would trigger an environmental assessment worksheet, and its big brother, if you will, an environmental impact statement, because that has a higher threshold. So the threshold for an environmental assessment worksheet or an EAW is not met in this case. So an environmental assessment worksheet would not be complete completed, however, a phase 1 environmental review, which is typical with all development proposals, has been completed as a part of this project.
Okay, thank you very much, appreciate that. May I assume that any complaints of noise generated from the property would go through proper channels of a noise complaint, similar as if they would just have a noisy neighborhood of a ruckus party on a Saturday night?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is correct.
Okay, all right, so they have a way to, a complaint path.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, covered that. If there are any other staff questions?
Comment on animal impact, that's taken care of on the phase 1.
That's taken care of on the phase 1, yeah. I think, just in general, this is a private property development. The city has strategic plans for open space, saving space, and we also allow private development, of course, on land that may have been deferred in development over the years. Most of our cities getting built out. There are other private properties that have not been developed yet that are allowed to be developed, and that could include taking trees down, that could include grading, impacts to small animals and things like that, that fits our city's vision, comprehensive plan, and again, the dedication to open space is part of our comprehensive plan. And so I would encourage anybody to study those documents or call City Hall if they have a question about what land is available for public welfare versus private use.
There's a question about lighting.
Lighting? Yep.
Big club.
Yep. Okay. Question about the lighting. There was a site lighting plan, I believe, in the packet, and it featured some downcast pole lighting. That I don't know if we can invite the applicant up. If someone is knowledgeable about the site lighting, to just summarize if there's any fixtures that would be a disturbance to the neighbors. Could I get a comment from the applicant on that?
Certainly, I don't know the specifics, but the project does include downcast light fixtures, LED, downcast with, I believe some would have shut-off hoods as well.
Okay.
Generally, there should not be outwash.
Are any of the lights that you're proposing taller than your building?
No.
Okay, and on the site sections, we noticed that your building was below the tree line.
Correct.
So therefore, is it fair of us to say that all the lights are well below the tree line?
Below the tree line on the north side of the property, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So in terms of a glow from the neighborhood, I suspect that those people who like to buy property on high ground to get a vista, while you're not guaranteed any views, of course, by adjacent property owners, you are looking out over a car dealership, a lumber company, and others that have just a large assortment of lights on your horizon line. And given the lighting that I saw on the plan here, I'm going to suggest to you there's probably not a visible worsening of that lighting condition. But that's my own personal opinion. And if any other commissioners have anything they want to say about that, that's fine. Someone had a question about the zoning change, and that's why we're here tonight, to talk about guiding and zoning on the property, and that's the purpose of our meeting here tonight. Parking in the neighborhood, we talked about the availability of parking on the site, and we'll continue to talk about that tonight. But I think we have a sense that if residents have a lot of cars and they're running out of room, they're probably going to try and get as close to their apartment as possible and keep that parking violation on the property by parking in the aisles. I think that's just human nature. I don't think they're going to drive around and up the block and park in your neighborhood. But of course, if that happens and it becomes a nuisance, we understand that public parking is for all residents of the city. But if that becomes a nuisance, I think you have a pathway for a complaint, and that's when I think we start to engage with the private property owner about the problem.
Mr. Chair, can I ask on that note, just a clarification question on the city? My understanding was that you cannot park overnight on any Eden Prairie residential street. Is that correct, or is that assumption wrong?
I believe it's 24 hours, I don't know for sure if it's overnight. I think they have a 24-hour rule on that.
No parking, or you can park?
You can park up to 24 hours.
Oh, duration of 24 hours. Okay.
I believe that's.
Okay. For some reason, I thought that we could park overnight on residential streets.
Okay, and then I think the last thing I have on my notes here was just in general, the view of the building from up high, that some of the cross-sectional views and renderings that the applicant showed were kind of straight on view. And again, I would say, I don't think property owners have particular rights over their vistas as much as we all like to enjoy living on high ground. I think you're probably already seeing flat rooftops in your vista with rooftop units, air conditioning units, and things like that on there. And I think that the application, and again, this is an opinion right now of mine, but a residential style roof looking down would be more pleasing than some of the industrial roofs that are in the line of sight looking south with the car dealership and the other flat roof buildings there. But that's my opinion, and we can opine on that when we deliberate. So I think we've picked up on the significant notes that I have. Commissioners, did I miss anything?
No, I think you got mine.
No? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Taylor, you wanted to answer the question?
Yes, want to circle back to the U-turns and that's taking place by Top View and Valley. Is there any data available that will show how many accidents over the past 3 to 4 years have occurred at these intersections that we could take a look at?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, yes, it would be. I don't have that information. We have to do some research on the crash history, but that would be provided to after the meeting, after the fact.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, commissioners, deliberation time, thoughts, comments, questions. If anybody has some findings from the discussions we've had about the legitimacy of this application, I'd like to hear about some findings as well. We're open to some dialogue.
Mr.
Commissioner
Chair,
Reddy?
I'll be brief. I know I like to talk. Some of you know I work for a real estate multifamily developer in the Twin Cities that has thousands of units under management, and we develop suburban and urban properties. And I think I probably said this a while back before, but I wish in hindsight I looked into more of the ratios on our properties just for additional data, because I always find that helpful. But in general, we 1.4 stalls per unit is sort of what we're aiming for. I know we've done 1.3, obviously less in urban areas. So I'm just offering that as sort of a fact from another group. And then my only other comment on sort of this traffic and the U-turn thing, and actually I think this might, I don't know how well this will translate for the owner to help educate its tenants, but obviously many of the people on your way home, if you're coming off of 212, right? So the majority of people, if you're coming anywhere from the east, are going to be coming off on Prairie Center Drive. If you go straight on that exit, you're either going to turn left towards Home Depot, then right where you have to do the U-turn, or you can go straight on Plaza Drive and come around and avoid having to do the U-turn. I think if people are educated on that, and hopefully also over time learn, especially if you're a nervous driver and don't like the U-turn, encouraging people to use that route, and whether you're coming from downtown Eden Prairie too, you can always just take a right there on Plaza Drive. I'm sorry, I just got a text from marketing too. When I asked her about the ratio, I said, what's our average desired parking ratio for suburban product? And she said, depending on projection of empty nesters, we can elevate it, but 1.3 per stalls per unit. So that reaffirms that number, 1.3.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Another data point.
Yeah. Commissioner Gooding?
Obviously, I've expressed concerns about the parking.
Yep.
I think the added unit count that they gave goes a long way to reducing some of my concern. And the other piece of it is, you know, the younger generations don't buy as many cars as we used to. So our you know, my kids are older than I care to admit, but, you know, they live in communities like this, and there's less automobiles. So, you know, we've got to be careful that we don't plan for what some of us more senior members of this group grew up with, and the younger generation doing something different. The U-turn was my other major concern, and you know, in reality, if they're willing to make it, you know, if it gets bad and it needs to be an issue and they are going to do the control turn, that really gets rid of the issue. You know, the green arrow versus the blinking yellow, in my mind, corrects it, right? Because the real issue isn't so much the road, it's the speed that they come down the road after coming off of 494. You know, it's fast. Probably could write a few tickets if even Prairie wanted to, you know, but it makes it a more dangerous environment, and the green arrow would do that. You know, and someday something's going to get built here. You know, this looks like to me like it's a pretty good project. It's got some hoops to get through with the city planners, but you know, it's borderline, but I think doable in my mind.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Kurt,
I'm on the fence on this one.
are you?
Yeah, there's some good things. I mean, it's an awkward piece of property. As we've all discussed, there aren't any unawkward pieces of property in Eden Prairie right now, or at least not very many. So there's problem. I think the developer is, we're bringing probably 55 affordable units into the community, which is a goal and a positive and something we need to strive for in Eden Prairie, get more affordable housing. I think that's a positive. I think the developer actually did a pretty good job saving trees. I mean, we see too many things come into the Planning Commission where let's just doze everything down and start from scratch. And I think trying to build into the environment and the topography also made it so you had to do that, but it works. So I like that. I'm not as worried about the traffic impact. The city has done a good job with our traffic infrastructure, and I've been on the Planning Commission a long time and I haven't seen any places where we've really had a disaster. So I don't expect this to be a major problem. The idea of Plaza Drive, Commissioner Meddy, is just, that's gold. I mean, that map needs to be on everything that they do, on an easy way to get to this property. The parking is the kicker. We had a development, Martin Blue, about, 6-8 years ago, and I voted against it because of parking. I thought it was too much into a small space without enough parking. I have to admit, Martin Blue has been successful and we haven't had any problems. So that one worked out. Another one which still bothers me as a planning commissioner is Tavern 4 and 5 came in and said, don't worry, we'll take care of all the parking issues. And I don't go to Tavern 4 and 5 anymore because it's impossible to park. So that again, if it just impacts their business, is not our concern from the city standpoint, at least in my opinion. But if it starts to overlap and impact the city streets, the neighborhoods, and things like that with cars that don't have a place to park. And so the big question I have is, where will guests and unallocated cars park? And I don't know the answer to that question, and it scares me a little bit. So I want to listen to the rest of my colleagues before I finalize my decision.
Commissioner Taylor?
Yeah, I'm kind of also sitting borderline here. The parking is a big issue. You know, there's that, when there's this level of hierarchy where when it comes to, and the U-turns, but when it comes to kind of safety, you try to substitute or engineer specific things in place so that you don't have to worry about it being an issue. And in this case, when it comes to parking, we're asking the residents and the nearby neighbors to administer it. And that's not a good a good field to go into. And when it comes to that traffic pattern with the U-turns, it definitely would be good to see the data of the accidents there. But I just have a feeling that there's going to be more accidents happening if we don't engineer that area, that section. I think one of the comments was we'll see what happens, but we shouldn't wait to see what happens. If we can change the light configuration so that you can only turn or make turns when it's appropriate, I would recommend we do that. And then the feedback from the neighbors and around the area. It'd be good to hear whether or not you would be open to trying to have another neighborhood meeting to talk to the neighbors to see what type of outcome you would have in that aspect as well. So.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about some findings for some of the waivers that we're asking as part of planned unit development. One of them was the density from 17.5 units per acre to 30 units per acre. I think that comes part and parcel with a lot of things we're talking about with just the density of units adding to the traffic and parking and things like that. So I think that's just kind of tucked in with our larger conversation. Building height from 45 to 65 feet, that additional 25 feet I think is fine. I think the applicant demonstrated through cross-sectional views and from the surrounding areas, including from the neighborhood, that the project is well screened and in fact fits in with the overall shape of other single-family residents, and that I think would be a better zoning transition to the neighborhood than office. That's my opinion. Total parking stalls, that's we're talking about that. Wall sign waiver, I agree with the reallocation of square footage on the wall sign. I think that's an easy sell. The wetland structure encroachment for those paths is something that's agreeable to me. So I think all those waivers are satisfactory. I agree with Commissioner Kirsch's comment about while the city may have some skin in the game, I think this is the applicant's projects to manage, and it's your financial risk. Tony, you started out by saying that at the head of the meeting. You know this is a key issue, and you're willing to take that risk. And so if this project, quote unquote, I'm going to say fails in terms of satisfying parking, you guys aren't going to rent units, and that's the bottom line for your bottom line, and the city really doesn't care per se if you can't rent 100% of your units. We wish you all the success, and we're looking for ways to make you succeed. So you understand our caution, but you provided comparable properties, and with the wisdom of some of our commissioners here, I'm satisfied that rate is something that you're happy with and we can live with. And if it turns out to be a problem, I think the problem's going to stay on your property. I don't think your problem's going to bleed out to the public way due to the speed limits and the uphill walk to go fetch your car later up into the single family neighborhood. So I'm satisfied with that myself. Architecturally, I think this is a nice looking project. I think it breaks down the mass and scale of the building. I like the use of the brick that you showed, and I think it'll be a nice feature along Valley View Road, consistent with other multifamily projects in the city, even though this is a large mass. Commissioner Marcos.
I don't have a lot to add to what you guys have said. I agree with a lot of what's been said tonight. I'm actually a frequent user of this intersection, so I understand the neighborhood concerns with traffic. The U-turn thing would concern me. It is, people are flying through Valley View. I mean, we see that all throughout Valley View, but you're coming off of Top View, and it is a dangerous intersection in a lot of ways. And so there should be some concern and some thought put into it before something that were to happen. I think that Commissioner Taylor made a good point of let's not wait for something. Let's really think about this now. And if that means putting out good maps of telling people if this is the preferred route you should be taking, on top of changing the light, I'd rather have a blinking yellow personally, but if I have to wait at a red light, I guess that's fine for safety. When I first saw this, I thought, oh my gosh, there's so much parking. I don't want to look at this parking lot when I drive by. So it's ironic that we're now talking about it not being enough. I wish that we could go deeper and put more parking in. I wish we could do a first floor parking. I wish we could do anything to hide some of this parking and, you know, take that away and also add additional parking. And I hope, you know, it said in the minutes that it wasn't really explored. I hope it was. I hope you guys looked into it, and whether it's financial or environmental or whatnot, that it didn't make sense, then, I mean, there's not much I can do about it, but I do hope it was considered, because none of us want to look at big parking lots. We're in the suburbs, we get that. We have a lot of big parking lots, but we also need to accommodate the people that live there and the visitors that are coming. So I guess there's nothing more I have to add on parking at this time. I appreciate your comments on kind of what the going rate is these days. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. And we're pushing forward, right? We've been saying we're pushing Eden Prairie forward. And I think we have to think about that as we're allowing for these lower limits. And then in terms of just the building and the neighborhood, I also agree they did a nice job, I think, of making it look fit into the kind of this bowl of an area. It made me sad to think about the wildlife not having a home. Hopefully they'll come more into my backyard, but you know, it's just inevitable that this will get developed, and I think that it's an attractive development. So I'm also on the fence, but I do think it's a positive addition to that area, and hopefully it'll continue to kind of rejuvenate some of the other retail in that area.
Thank you, Commissioner Marcos. Appreciate your comments. Anybody else wish to opine? Commissioner Meddy?
I just want to add, I think for the benefit of us commissioners, as we're looking at what the motion is really stating, the staff report does reference about all this parking in the recommendation. And if we pass this motion, we're also agreeing that we recommend these things too, that within their development agreement, they're gonna have, that they're gonna require this language about at least one stall per unit being sort of reserved for that unit. Looking at visitor parking or some sort of lease with the neighboring property for visitor parking. And then also, you know, if it becomes an issue even after that, maybe there's some other solution down the road. So again, I think knowing that this isn't the end all, I think that there's gonna probably be some continued conversations with the city and the developer on solutions. You know, I think you could squeeze one or two stalls in there maybe from what you have now, that unless it's just really something a lot bigger. But I think I'm hoping that they'll be able to have a good solution with the neighbor on at least some visitor type of overflow, in which case I think that this is all gonna work out really well.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Kirk?
I'd just like to add a comment. This is more of an educational comment for those of you in the audience, and if this ever, I'm assuming this will be shown, but you have to understand the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is a volunteer group. We're all volunteers here. And our job is just to help make this city a good place. At least that's my view of it. And we are an advisory commission in this case. We hold public hearings and we vote. So one of the important things that we do is all this discussion that you hear going on and all of these questions, basically our audience is not only you and the developer and anybody who's watching this, but it's the city council. Because ultimately there'll be another public hearing at the city council on this, assuming it moves forward. And we want the city council to understand our issues and frankly our worries and what we think are strengths and weaknesses of this project, because our say isn't final. So I think it's important to put that in context, and if we spend a lot of time and we kind of stir the pot a lot, it's because we want to make sure that, you know, the city council, who are our elected officials, know all the issues and make the final decision with all the information they can have.
Well said. I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval for a guide plan change from office to medium high density residential on 7.01 acres Planned unit development concept review on 7.01 acres. Planned unit development district review with waivers on 7.01 acres. Zoning change from rural to RM 2.5 on 7.01 acres. Site plan review on 7.01 acres. And preliminary plat on 7.01 acres based on plans stamped dated June 1, 2022, and the staff report dated June 23, 2022.
Thank you. We have a motion for approval from Commissioner Sherwood. Any discussion on that point? I'll entertain a second.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Gooding. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
We have one opposed vote. Anybody wish to abstain?
I'm abstaining.
Abstaining, okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes for, 1 vote nay, 1 abstaining. The motion passes. Thank you. Congratulations and good luck at City Council. Appreciate it. Okay, Julie, do we have a planners report this evening?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would like to introduce Jeremy Barnhart to you. Jeremy is the new city planner. He joined the city not too long ago, and he's here in the front row, observing you for the first time.
Oh, great. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you on board and look forward to working with you. Members' reports, anybody have any reports that they wish to hit? Nothing? Okay, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay, I heard
Second.
Commissioner Kirk came. All right, we're gonna go Commissioner Grody first and Commissioner Kirk for the second. No discussion on that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.